Now it's a time to look at the data model. Typically in most of the organization, you have a dedicated information architect who looks into this area. But as an architect, maybe you want to look into this piece to understand more as how the various data elements interacts with one another. Now, what is data model? In simple term, it's data entity of your system and how they relate with one another, the relationship. Now, there are various levels of data model. Conceptual, which is a high level, to physical, which is very detail oriented, and logical being a state in between. Usually, your DBS will have a specific way of doing things on how they name and design and model data. So the physical level, you should leave it to them to come up with. It has got all the implementation details. As an architect, you will be most likely involved in the conceptual level, a high level understanding of data and its relationship, which won't have details like normalized cardinality or specific table structure. So the table shows what's in and what's out in each of the layer. And as you see, there are quite a few overlap. Conceptual data model relies more on entity name and relationship, logical attributes, primary key, foreign keys. And if you see, look at the physical, it has got all the details. It has got primary key, foreign key, table name, column name, and data types. As an architect, you'll be mostly involved in defining the left side of the table, that's a conceptual level. Now let's look at the audience. Obviously, DBS and information architects are the primary audience of this diagram. Architects would be another set of audience for this diagram. Developer, as they want to know more about the data structure, its relationship. Production support, any future enhancement, maintenance on the database. They should be aware of data and its relationship and how it's modeled. And lastly, infra management, the infra management team. So when it's used throughout the project, I believe this is one of those diagrams which is used throughout the project, and it's used early on in the project to validate the data, to know what's in, what's out. And I've also seen in some projects that the team actually take a printout of this diagram and stick it on the wall so that everyone in the team has got a clear understanding how the data is structured and the relationship between them. And it's quite a useful document during maintenance scenario. At this point, I would like you to pause the video and take a look as what could be the initial high-level data model for AutoCAD self-drive taxi application, and draw your data model diagram. When you're done, continue with your video, then I'll show you what I came up with. Alright, now that you have tried doing the data model, let's see what I have built. So this is my high-level diagram. So we have a request data element which stores request for taxi which is tied to a passenger. So it's one-to-one relationship, as one request is tied to one passenger. I am separating the actual request to the ride as the request could be cancelled. So each customer can have 0 or many rides. There could be some indicator in the ride data element to show if it's an active versus history. And you have the actual taxi which is identified by some ID. We have named it here as a car ID. This being a self-drive taxi, each taxi will have some level of engine information, health point data, which describes the current health status of the vehicle. And this data element is passed to AutoCAD maintenance team for analysis purposes. I also think that each of the health point data could have engine code, which could be multiple of those. Now, maybe I'm wrong about that. Again, I would rather like to have this kind of discussion on whiteboard or a piece of paper now during the design phase rather than actually discussing during the development or build phase of the project. So this is my conceptual look at it. This is not everything in the system. Probably there are some other bits that we haven't thought about it, and that's perfectly fine. You can also go a level deeper and add address location to the passenger data element, or add software version to the car data element, which will have details of history of software patches and updates. Now this kind of information you add to the diagram, not that because 100% we believe that it need to be there, but as we want to have that conversation with the stakeholder of whether it should or should not be there early in the project.